I stopped believing my brother loved me the day I found my college application essay in his email drafts. That was 8 years ago, and I've been collecting evidence ever since. My name is Rachel, and I need to tell you about my brother William. Not because I want sympathy. Not because I want to be the victim. But because I need someone to understand what it's like to watch someone systematically dismantle your life while everyone around you calls it sibling rivalry. William is 3 years older than me. Growing up, he was the golden child. Athletic, charismatic, the kind of kid who could charm teachers and coaches and pretty much any adult in a 50-foot radius. I was the quiet one. The reader. The one who actually did the homework while William smooth-talked his way through high school with a C average and a starting position on the varsity basketball team. I didn't mind being in his shadow back then. I actually looked up to him. I remember being 12 years old, watching him accept some award at a school assembly, and feeling this surge of pride that he was my brother. I thought we were a team. The first time I realized something was wrong, I was 16. I'd spent 6 months working on a history project about the civil rights movement. I'd interviewed local activists, spent weekends at the library going through old newspapers, built this whole multimedia presentation. I was proud of it. Really proud. It was the first time I'd felt like I'd created something that mattered. William was 19, home from his first year at community college. He dropped out after 1 semester. Said college wasn't for him. My parents were disappointed but supportive. That's how they always were with William. Disappointed but supportive. I showed him my project one night when he was home. Set up the whole thing in our living room. He watched, nodded along, said it was really good. 2 weeks later, I found out he'd enrolled in a local state school. Not as a regular student. He'd applied for this special program for students who wanted to return to education after a break. Part of the application required a portfolio of work showing their commitment to learning. He submitted my project. Changed some names, tweaked the presentation, but it was my work. My research. My interviews. And he got in. Full scholarship for returning students showing exceptional promise. I didn't say anything. I was 16. He was my older brother. When I tried to tell my mom, she looked at me like I was being petty. William said I must have misunderstood. Said we'd worked on similar topics, that's all. It was an honest coincidence. I let it go. I told myself I was overreacting. When I was applying to colleges 2 years later, I wrote this essay about my grandmother. She'd immigrated from Vietnam in the 70s, worked 3 jobs to put my mom through school, never learned to read English but could speak it fluently. It was personal. Vulnerable. The kind of essay that college admissions counselors tell you to write because it shows who you are beyond your grades. I worked on that essay for months. Probably went through 30 drafts. I had my English teacher review it, revised it again, finally felt like I'd captured something true about my grandmother's strength and what it meant to me. I got into a good school. Not Ivy League, but solid. State flagship with a decent scholarship. I was happy with it. William was 21 by then, struggling at the state school he'd gotten into with my project. He was on academic probation. Barely showing up to classes. My parents were stressed about it constantly. Would he graduate? Should they keep paying tuition? Was he wasting his opportunities? That summer, William suddenly announced he was transferring. Applying to better schools for his senior year. Said he needed a fresh start. Needed to take his education seriously. I found the essay by accident. He'd used my laptop because his was broken. I opened his email to log him out and there it was. In his drafts folder. My essay. Word for word. With his name on it. He hadn't just copied it. He'd personalized it. Changed the grandmother to his grandmother. Our grandmother. Added his own reflection that was honestly pretty shallow compared to what I'd written. But the core of it, the emotional heart, the specific anecdotes I'd shared. All mine. I confronted him. Showed him the email. He didn't deny it. Just shrugged. Said I'd gotten into a good school anyway, so what did it matter? Said our grandmother was his family too. Said I was being dramatic. I told my parents. My dad sat William down for a conversation. I don't know what was said. But William transferred to a better school that fall. Got a partial scholarship. My parents were relieved. He was finally taking things seriously. I was furious. But I was also 18 and about to leave for college, and I told myself it didn't matter. He'd stolen my work twice. But he was family. And families forgive things. College was my escape. I studied engineering. Threw myself into my coursework. Made friends who didn't know William. Built a life that was mine. I did 2 internships. Joined a research lab. Started to feel like I was becoming someone separate from being William's little sister. Senior year, I applied for this fellowship. It was competitive. Really competitive. Full funding for graduate school plus a stipend plus guaranteed research placement. I spent months on my application. The personal statement required outlining your research interests and how they connected to your long-term goals. I wrote about wanting to work on sustainable infrastructure. About how growing up in a community that flooded every spring had made me aware of how engineering could either protect or fail vulnerable populations. I submitted the application in December. Found out I was a finalist in February. The final round required an interview and a presentation of proposed research. I called my parents, excited. My mom was happy for me but distracted. William had moved back home after graduation. Couldn't find a job. Was living in his old room, talking about maybe going to graduate school himself. I should have known then. Should have recognized the pattern. I went home for spring break. William wanted to hear all about the fellowship. What was the application like? What kind of research was I proposing? What questions did they ask in the interview? I told him everything. I was proud. I wanted him to be proud of me for once. 2 months later, I got an email. I hadn't won the fellowship. They'd selected another candidate. I was disappointed but okay with it. These things happen. They encouraged me to apply to graduate programs anyway. Said my application had been strong. I moved on. Got accepted to a decent graduate program with partial funding. Wasn't the fellowship, but it was fine. I was moving forward. William applied to graduate schools that summer. Suddenly very interested in engineering. In sustainable infrastructure specifically. He'd taken exactly one engineering course as an undergrad. He'd majored in communications. But now he was passionate about infrastructure. He got into a top program. Full funding. The same fellowship I'd applied for. I saw his application materials by accident the next Christmas. He'd left them out in the living room. Wanted to show my parents. I read through his research proposal while he was in the kitchen. It was my proposal. Not word for word this time. He'd changed enough that it wasn't plagiarism in the technical sense. But the core idea, the approach, the connection to flooding and vulnerable communities. All mine. He'd even used the same case study examples I'd mentioned in conversations with him. I didn't say anything at Christmas. I was so tired of saying things that no one believed. But I started paying attention. Really paying attention. Graduate school for William lasted 1 year. He dropped out. Said it wasn't the right fit. My parents were disappointed but supportive. He moved back home again. I finished my master's degree. Got a job at a good firm. Started working on real projects. Building things. I loved it. William moved to my city. Said he wanted a fresh start. Wanted to be closer to me. We could hang out more. Be real siblings again. I helped him find an apartment. Introduced him to some people. Tried to have a relationship with him despite everything. Because he was my brother. Because I wanted to believe he'd changed. I was working on this project at work. Small bridge replacement in a low-income neighborhood. Nothing glamorous. But I'd noticed something in the original designs. A drainage issue that would cause flooding if we followed the standard approach. I proposed a modification. Spent weeks modeling different solutions. Presented it to my team. They loved it. Implemented my design. It was the first time I'd made a real contribution that would help actual people. I told William about it over dinner. Was excited. Wanted to share. 3 months later, William got a job at a competing firm. No engineering degree. No technical experience. But he'd networked his way in. Sales position. Client relations. He was good at talking. 6 months after that, I saw his LinkedIn. He'd posted about a project his firm was working on. A bridge design with innovative drainage solutions for flood-prone areas. He talked about the importance of sustainable infrastructure. About how engineers needed to think beyond standard solutions. He was taking credit for my idea. Not directly. He wasn't saying he designed anything. But he was describing it as if he'd been part of the development. As if he'd contributed to the thinking. I confronted him. He said I was being paranoid. Said lots of people were thinking about drainage and flooding. Said I didn't own ideas. Said I was jealous of his success. That's when something shifted in me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was calculating. I started documenting everything. Every conversation where I shared work details. Every time William asked about my projects. I started feeding him information. Watching to see what he'd do with it. He used it. Every time. In client meetings. In proposals. In presentations. He'd take my ideas, sand off the technical edges until they were vague enough to be sales talk, and present them as insights he developed. His career took off. He was good at his job once he had material to work with. Charming clients. Making connections. He got promoted. Then promoted again. I was doing fine. My work was solid. But I wasn't moving up as fast. And I was starting to hear things. Through the professional grapevine. People who thought William was brilliant. Innovative. A fresh voice in the industry. Using my voice. I thought about exposing him. But what would I say? That my brother sometimes used ideas that sounded like mine? That he talked about concepts I'd mentioned in private conversations? There was no proof. Nothing concrete. Just a pattern I could see but couldn't make anyone else understand. That's when I met David. David was a journalist. Worked for a trade publication that covered engineering and infrastructure. We met at a conference. Started talking at the hotel bar after a particularly boring keynote. He was funny. Smart. Actually interested in the technical details of my work, not just the glossy headline version. We started dating. Took it slow. He lived 2 hours away, so we mostly saw each other on weekends. It was good. Easy. He asked questions about my projects, but never in a way that felt intrusive. He was just genuinely curious about how things worked. I didn't introduce him to William for months. Didn't even tell William the first was seeing someone. I'd learned to keep things separate. But David was doing a story. A big feature about emerging voices in sustainable infrastructure. He wanted to interview people who were actually doing innovative work. Not executives. Not famous names. People in the field making real contributions. He asked if I'd be willing to be interviewed. I said yes. The interview happened at my apartment. I walked him through some of my recent projects. Showed him the drainage design that had worked so well. Explained my approach to thinking about infrastructure in vulnerable communities. He recorded everything. Took notes. Asked really good follow-up questions. William called me that night. Wanted to get dinner that weekend. I said I couldn't. I was busy. He pushed. Said we barely saw each other anymore. I told him I was seeing someone. He wanted details. I was vague. The article came out 3 weeks later. It was good. Really good. David had captured what I actually cared about in my work. Why I did this job. The technical details were accurate. The quotes were thoughtful. I sounded like myself. William called me an hour after the article went live. Congratulations. He sounded weird. Not happy weird. Tense weird. He wanted to meet my boyfriend. Said it was about time. Family should know these things. I'd been expecting this. Waiting for it actually. We met at a restaurant. Neutral territory. David was great. Polite, engaging, asked William about his work. William was charming. Told stories. Made jokes. I watched them interact. David didn't know what I knew. Didn't understand the history. He just saw 2 siblings having dinner. Toward the end of the meal, William started asking David about his work. What stories was he working on? How did he choose his subjects? What made someone interesting enough to feature? David talked about the article he'd written about me. Said it was one of his favorite pieces. That I'd given him a perspective he hadn't considered before about how infrastructure decisions affected communities. William nodded along. Said he'd love to talk to David sometime about some of the work his firm was doing. They were doing really innovative stuff. He could provide insights into how these ideas were being implemented at scale. David said sure. Gave William his card. They exchanged information. I said nothing. Just watched it happen. Over the next month, William reached out to David several times. Coffee meetings. Lunch. Sent him materials about projects his firm was working on. David mentioned it to me casually. Said my brother was really helpful. Surprisingly knowledgeable about infrastructure challenges. I asked what they talked about. David told me. I recognized every idea. Every approach. Every insight. They were mine. Things I'd mentioned to William in passing. Things I'd explained to David in more depth. William had absorbed them, simplified them, and was now presenting them as his professional expertise. David thought William was brilliant. Told me I must be proud of my brother. Said we were both so passionate about the same issues. It must be a family thing. I wanted to scream. But I didn't. Because I finally understood how to prove it. I told David I wanted to work on a project together. A passion project. An investigative piece about how infrastructure planning decisions were being made in our city. Who had influence? What interests were being represented? Were community voices actually being heard? David loved the idea. Said his editor would probably be interested if we framed it right. I told William about it too. Very casually. Over text. Said I was working on something with David. Big investigation into infrastructure planning. Really exciting. Could be a major story. William asked questions. What angle were we taking? Who were we talking to? What had we found so far? I fed him breadcrumbs. Told him we were looking into this specific development project. Said there were some questionable decisions being made. Some potential conflicts of interest. Couldn't say more yet. Still gathering evidence. He said it sounded interesting. Asked if I needed any help. He knew people involved in that project. Could make introductions. I said that would be great. We should all grab coffee soon. Here's what I didn't tell William. The project I described didn't exist. Not the way I'd presented it. The development was real. But there were no questionable decisions. No conflicts of interest. I'd made that up. What I did was create documents. Fake analysis. Preliminary findings. I wrote it all up like it was research David and I had done. I made it look credible. Professional. The kind of thing that could be a real story. And then I left it out. In my apartment. When I knew William was coming over. He'd shown up unannounced a few times lately. Said he was in the neighborhood. Wanted to catch up. I'd let him in. Made coffee. Acted normal. Left papers on my desk. Left my laptop open sometimes. Gave him opportunities. I knew he'd look. He'd always looked. That's who he was. 2 weeks later, William had lunch with David. Brought up the development project. Said he'd heard they were working on that story. Said he had some concerns. As someone who worked in the industry, he thought they should be careful. There were legal implications to reporting on stuff like this. They needed to make sure their facts were absolutely solid. David called me afterward. Confused. Said William had seemed worried about the investigation. Had we shared too much with him? Should we be more careful about confidentiality? I said maybe. Said we should probably keep the details closer for now. Said I'd talk to William. Make sure he understood this was sensitive. Then I waited. William called me that night. Said we needed to talk. Could I come over? I went to his apartment. He looked stressed. Said he was worried about me. About this investigation. Did I really know what I was getting into? These were powerful people I was looking into. What if there was retaliation? What if it damaged my career? I said I'd be careful. Said David knew what he was doing. We had it under control. William said he'd been doing some research. He'd looked into the development project himself. Wanted to understand what we were investigating. And he'd found some things. Some documentation that raised questions. He could help. He could be a resource. I asked what kind of documentation. He pulled out a folder. Inside were printouts. Analysis of contracts. Questions about bidding processes. All the fake material I'd created. He'd photographed it. Probably when I was in the kitchen making coffee during one of his visits. He'd taken my fabricated research and was presenting it as his own investigation. I acted surprised. Said I hadn't realized he'd been looking into this too. Said it was good we were on the same page. He relaxed. Said we should work together on this. Combine our resources. He could talk to David. Provide the documentation. Help shape the story. I said that sounded great. But I wanted to make sure we were coordinating. Could he send me what he'd found? I'd compare it to our research. Make sure we weren't duplicating efforts. He sent me everything that night. Confidently. Like he'd done real investigation. It was all my fabricated material. Nothing else. He hadn't actually researched anything. Just stolen what I'd left out for him and presented it as his work. I showed it to David the next day. Showed him the original documents on my laptop. The ones I'd created. With timestamps. With metadata. I walked him through what I'd done. What I'd been testing. David didn't say anything for a long time. Just looked at the documents. At the evidence. Then he asked if this was the first time. I told him everything. The college essay. The fellowship application. The research proposal. The bridge design. Every time William had taken something of mine and claimed it as his own. All the times I'd tried to say something and been told I was overreacting. David asked if I had proof of the earlier incidents. I said some of it was just patterns. Conversations. Things I'd noticed but couldn't document. But this time I documented everything. Every file. Every conversation. Every time I'd fed William information and watched him use it. He asked what I wanted to do. I said I wanted to write it. A real story. Not about William specifically. About a pattern of behavior. About how some people build careers on other people's ideas. How they take just enough that it's not technically plagiarism, but it's still theft. David said his editor wouldn't publish a story about my brother without substantial evidence. It would be complicated. Potential legal issues. Family drama. I said I wasn't talking about exposing William publicly. Not yet. I was talking about documenting the pattern. Creating a record. So that if he ever did this again to me or to anyone else, there would be proof. We talked for hours that day. About what I'd experienced. About whether confrontation or documentation was the right approach. About what I actually wanted to achieve. I realized I didn't want revenge. Not really. I wanted William to stop. I wanted him to understand what he'd been doing. And I wanted protection. So that next time I wouldn't be dismissed as the jealous little sister making accusations. I confronted William one more time. Brought David with me. Showed William everything. The fake documents. The real originals. The timeline of when I'd created them versus when he'd presented them as his research. William denied it at first. Said I must have gotten confused. Said we discussed these issues together. Said the ideas had evolved through conversation. I showed him the earlier incidents. The essay. The research proposal. The bridge design. Pattern after pattern. Year after year. His whole career built on fragments he'd taken from me. He got quiet then. Defensive. Said I'd always been jealous of him. That I resented his success. That I couldn't stand seeing him do well. David spoke up then. Said he'd been watching. Listening. Taking notes. Said that what William had done with the development project wasn't just borrowing ideas. It was presenting fabricated research as his own investigation. That had professional implications beyond family drama. William looked at me. Really looked at me. And for a second I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Not guilt. Fear. He said he'd stop. He wouldn't contact David anymore. Wouldn't talk about infrastructure. Would stay in his lane. I said that wasn't enough. I needed him to understand what he'd taken from me. Not just ideas. But credit. Recognition. The ability to build my own professional reputation without wondering if he'd undermine it. We didn't resolve it that night. William left angry. Defensive. I didn't hear from him for 3 weeks. Then I got an email. From William. Long. Rambling. Not quite an apology, but closer than anything I'd ever gotten from him. He said he'd never thought of it as stealing. That in his mind we were family. What was mine was his. That he'd been struggling his whole life to figure out who he was, what he was good at, and every time I succeeded it felt like evidence of his own failure. So he'd taken pieces of what I did and tried to make them his own. Tried to feel like he was capable of something. He said he knew that wasn't an excuse. That he'd hurt me. That he'd built his career on a foundation that wasn't real. And now he didn't know how to move forward. How to do this job without the ideas he'd borrowed from me. I didn't respond right away. Let it sit for a few days. Then I called him. I told him I wasn't going to forgive him. Not now. Maybe not ever. That what he'd done had damaged our relationship permanently. But I also said I wasn't going to expose him publicly. Wasn't going to ruin his career. That wasn't who I wanted to be. But I set boundaries. Clear ones. No more asking about my work. No more professional overlap. If we were going to have any kind of relationship, it had to be separate from our careers. William agreed. Said he'd look for work outside the infrastructure field. That he needed to find something that was actually his. He moved back across the country 3 months later. Got a job doing marketing for a tech company. Completely different industry. Fresh start. My parents still don't fully understand what happened. They know there was a falling out. That William moved for work. That we're not as close as we used to be. But I never told them the full extent. Didn't want to make them choose. Didn't want to be the daughter who destroyed the family by refusing to let things go. David and I are still together. We never wrote the fake story about the development project. But we did write something else. A piece about intellectual property in professional settings. About how ideas travel. About the difference between collaboration and appropriation. It was published 6 months ago. Got good engagement. Some industry discussion. William probably read it. I don't know if he recognized himself in it. We don't talk enough for me to ask. I still think about all of it sometimes. Wonder if I handled it right. If documenting everything and confronting him was worth it. If I should have just let it go like I'd always done before. But then I remember what it felt like. Watching him present my ideas. Watching people praise him for brilliance that wasn't his. The quiet rage of being invisible in my own story. I don't regret exposing him. Even if it was messy. Even if it cost us our relationship. Even if my parents still don't quite believe the full truth of it. Because for the first time in my life, I'm not wondering if William is going to take the next thing I build. I'm not filtering my conversations. Not hiding my work. Not making myself smaller so he can feel bigger. I'm building things now. Real things. Bridges and systems and solutions. And they're mine. Just mine. And that feels like enough. The last time I saw William was at Christmas last year. We were polite. Distant. Made small talk about weather and work in the vaguest terms. My parents watched us, sad that their children aren't close anymore. I don't know if he's changed. Don't know if he's actually building something of his own or if he's found new people to take from. That's not my responsibility anymore. What I know is that I changed. Stopped being the person who documented everything but never acted on it. Stopped being afraid of conflict. Stopped prioritizing family peace over my own dignity. It cost me my brother. Maybe permanently. But I got myself back. And I'm still trying to figure out if that was the right trade.